What really happened when Elizabeth Warren lost control after John Kennedy told her to shut up? Idiot shook Capitol Hill and every major media outlet across the country. The clash unfolded during a tense live policy debate on federal spending. Broadcast nationwide. Kennedy had been visibly irritated by Warren's interruptions as he attempted to lay out his economic argument. When she cut in for the third time, accusing him of fear-mongering with outdated math, Kennedy snapped. Without raising his voice, he leaned into his mic and said, "Shut up, idiot." The room froze. The moderator choked on words. Warren blinked, stunned. No one in the chamber or watching at home could believe what they just heard. Elizabeth's reaction was immediate and explosive. Her face turned crimson as she stood, slamming her palm on the desk and firing back, "How dare you speak to a sitting senator that way?" Kennedy, unfazed, folded his arms and said, "Then act like one." Gasps rippled through the panel. Staffers off camera scrambled while producers frantically signaled to go to commercial, but the feed stayed live. Warren turned to the moderator, demanding an apology be issued on air. Kennedy, meanwhile, remained stone-faced, as if daring her to escalate. The atmosphere was electric. Viewers online were already clipping the moment, uploading it with headlines like "Kennedy goes nuclear" and "Warren melts down." As Warren tried to regain control of the conversation, her voice cracked under pressure. "This is beneath the dignity of this chamber," she yelled, trying to reclaim the moral high ground. But Kennedy calmly replied, "So is your condescension. Every time someone disagrees with you," the audience, made up of policy aides and reporters, couldn't suppress murmurs and chuckles. It was no longer just a debate, it had turned personal. The moderator finally cut in, but it was too late. The confrontation had been burned into the nation's screens. Headlines were already forming. The damage, political and personal, been done in under 60 seconds. The segment went viral within minutes. Social media exploded with hashtags like #WarrenUnhinged and #KennedyClapBack. Supporters from both sides battled it out online, with video clips circulating across all platforms. Pundits were divided, some calling Kennedy sexist and disrespectful, others praising his refusal to be silenced. Major networks replayed the footage on loop, each offering their own spin. CNN invited body language experts to analyze the moment. Fox News labeled it a historic shutdown. But one thing was undeniable: Warren's loss of composure had eclipsed the policy discussion entirely. It wasn't just politics anymore, it was raw theater. Behind closed doors, Warren's staff scrambled for damage control. Aides coached her for upcoming interviews, urging her to reframe the incident as a case of institutional misogyny. Meanwhile, Kennedy's camp remained eerily silent, issuing only a one-line response. He said what millions were thinking. That single sentence poured fuel on an already raging fire. The silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Kennedy had delivered a soundbite so blunt, so shocking, it couldn't be walked back. Nor did he try, a media culture driven by outrage. He had stolen the spotlight and forced his opponent into the defensive corner. The next morning, Elizabeth Warren appeared on MSNBC, trying to pivot the narrative. "When women assert themselves, we're called emotional or unhinged," she said, her tone steady but her eyes weary. The host nodded, but the footage of her losing control still played in the corner of the screen. Viewers weren't listening. To her explanation, they were watching her reaction. The words "shut up, idiot" echoed louder than any policy talking points. Every attempt to shift the conversation felt more like spin. Kennedy had said 7 words, but they had unraveled hours of prep, strategy, and messaging. By midday, Kennedy was back in the Senate chamber, shaking hands, joking with colleagues, and showing no signs of regret. When asked by a reporter if he'd apologize, he smiled and said, "I'll apologize when she starts listening instead of lecturing." It wasn't just a political stance, it was a cultural moment. In an age where every politician is carefully coached and polished, Kennedy's bluntness hit like a brick through glass. For some, it was appalling. For others, refreshing. But either way, it worked. The story was no longer about inflation, it was about confrontation. And Kennedy had won the narrative. Meanwhile, late-night comedians couldn't resist. Clips of the moment made their way into monologues. The impersonators mimicking Warren's outburst and Kennedy's stone-cold stare. Memes flooded the internet. One of the most viral showed a split screen of Warren yelling and Kennedy sipping sweet tea with the caption, "Unbothered as always." It wasn't fair, but it was effective. Warren, for all her credentials and command of policy, was now being remembered not for legislation, but for losing her cool. Kennedy, the master of Southern sarcasm, had delivered his point not through policy but performance. Political analysts agreed. Warren's biggest mistake wasn't getting angry, it was showing it. Voters, they argued, respect passion, but punish volatility. You can't outshout someone who doesn't raise their voice, one strategist said. And Kennedy hadn't. He'd remained composed while letting Warren unravel. In doing so, he flipped the emotional script. She had the intellect, he had the instinct, and instincts win television. The debate would go down as one of the most uncomfortable in Senate broadcast history, not because of what was said about the budget, but because of what it revealed about both characters. The Senate Ethics Committee received multiple complaints, some demanding Kennedy be censured, others calling for Warren to apologize, but neither side budged. The tension lingered for weeks, coloring every committee meeting and hallway interaction. Both politicians carried on with their work, but the chill between them was palpable. Staffers were instructed not to seat them near each other during public events. And yet, the moment remained immortal. In 7 words, Kennedy had etched a permanent line in modern political showdowns. And Elizabeth Warren, for better or worse, would always be remembered for the moment she lost control. In the days that followed, think pieces flooded every major outlet. Some writers defended Warren, accusing Kennedy of bullying and triggering her frustration on purpose. Others insisted her overreaction proved Kennedy's point that performative outrage had replaced true debate. As the media dissected every second of the incident, clips of the confrontation became lecture material in political science classrooms. Professors debated whether Kennedy's bluntness was a breach of decorum or a return to unfiltered honesty. Students watched, wide-eyed, as real-time political theater outpaced scripted civility. Warren may have brought policy, but Kennedy had delivered spectacle. Spectacle always wins the screen. Meanwhile, Kennedy's approval ratings among conservative voters spiked. Town hall attendees cheered him, holding signs that read, "Shut up, idiot," with American flags printed behind the words. He leaned into the chaos, joking in one interview, "I was raised not to say that, but sometimes manners lose to madness." The crowd roared. His base wasn't just laughing, they were rallying. It wasn't about economics or healthcare anymore. It was about attitude. It was about fighting back. And Kennedy, with his sly smirk and deep Southern drawl, gave them a champion who didn't mind tossing the rulebook in front of a camera. Elizabeth Warren, on the other hand, entered a quieter season. Though she remained active on the Senate floor, her media appearances dropped significantly. When she did speak, her tone was more measured, more cautious. Critics said she seemed muted, while allies claimed she was simply refocusing on substance. But no matter the spin, the echo of that confrontation trailed her. Every time she rose to speak in a hearing, someone online would repost the clip. Every post she made drew replies with Kennedy's infamous line. It wasn't fair, but fairness never dictated public memory. The internet had chosen its moment. Privately, Warren was said to be deeply frustrated not just at Kennedy, but at herself. According to an anonymous aide, she rewatched the debate several times, picking apart her tone, her words, her body language. "She's furious she let him get under her skin," the aide confessed. She didn't want to give him that moment, but she did. Friends urged her to release a follow-up speech, to reclaim the narrative. But every draft sounded like over-explanation. She knew too well that over-explaining only made her look defensive. Gay dead. Shh. But silence. In politics, sometimes, screams the loudest. Across Washington, the fallout spread quietly. Scheduled bipartisan panel featuring both Warren and Kennedy was quietly canceled. Political analysts noted how their feud had chilled several legislative efforts where their cooperation was once expected. One reporter put it best: "In an era where everyone films everything, The worst thing a politician can do isn't say something offensive. It's lose control while someone else stays cool. Kennedy hadn't just called her out. He'd stayed composed while doing it. And in that stillness, he gained leverage. Power now belonged to the person who didn't flinch. That was the new standard. The Democratic Party scrambled to pivot the attention, public endorsements, new initiatives, coordinated media appearances, all to draw the narrative back to policy. But nothing stuck. That one phrase, 7 brutal syllables, still thundered louder than 1,000 talking points. Her part, Warren stopped responding to questions about the incident.
When asked on a podcast how she'd handle things,